Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Making 2D Minecraft. Over the past few episodes, I've been mostly busy getting the foundations for this game up off the ground. But in today's episode, I would like to polish some of the things I've implemented already, as well as adding some cool new features that I think you guys will find quite fascinating. So without further ado, let's get started. Now the first thing I want to do in this episode is to implement a feature that's ironically very foundational to Minecraft. And this feature is something that you guys clowned on me for not adding in the last episode, which is crafting. Implementing crafting ended up being an extremely tedious process, but the way it works is that I have a file that stores all of the recipes by specifying the pattern of items required to craft each recipe. But the problem is that some of the recipes, such as the recipe for a torch, don't take up the entirety of the crafting grid. And the reason this is a problem is that if the recipe is checked for in the corner of the crafting grid, then it could end up missing a valid crafting pattern that isn't aligned with that corner. So to fix this, I came up with a laborious system that shifts over items into any empty rows and columns in the crafting grid, so that recipes can be crafted in any position, as long as the recipe is still valid. I also made it so that certain recipes can use a variety of different blocks. For example, if I try and craft a tool like a wooden pickaxe, I can use a combination of multiple different kinds of wooden planks, and yet it yields the same result. Alright, it feels really good to finally have the crafting done and out of the way. The next thing I want to work on is something more visual. Right now the background is just a simple rectangular gradient that changes color depending on the time of the day. So it's pretty barren right now. So one thing I want to add to it is the sun and the moon. Now, unlike implementing crafting, this process was actually pretty simple, and rather enjoyable. I decided to have the sun and the moon follow a circular pattern, with each being on opposite sides of the circle. As for the sun and the moon themselves, the sun is just a normal texture, but the texture for the moon is actually a texture atlas, with a bunch of different moon phases on it. Right now, I have the moon's phase depend on the seed of the world, but later on it will change depending on the day, as you'd expect. Here's a time-lapse of the cycle so that you could see what it looks like in action. It's very calming to watch, and a nice benefit of it is that it allows you to identify the time of the day, just by looking into the sky. Alright, with the sun and the moon now added, the background is starting to look better, but it's still missing something. In Terraria, one thing that you will quickly realize is that the background changes depending on what biome you're in, and it really gives each biome its own atmosphere. So let's do the same thing. To get started, I wrote out some basic image loading code, so that the backgrounds I make for each biome can be automatically loaded in. Then I started creating the first biome background. The way these backgrounds work is that the blocks match up to each other on both sides. So when the background is rendered, it's seamless as you move around. If you're wondering why the backgrounds are translucent, it's because I found that the background would often cover up the sun and the moon. So to fix that, I just decided it would look better to just have the background be slightly transparent, instead of fully opaque. What's cool is that if I go between two different biomes, the backgrounds actually fade into each other, giving a smooth transition while you're playing. Overall, I would say our attempts to improve the background have been a major success, although I might end up adding things such as clouds later on. Moving on from the background, the next thing I want to focus on is implementing a special kind of block, known as a tile entity. If you've never heard of a tile entity before, basically, in Minecraft, most blocks are static and don't store any extra information, other than what the game requires for rendering. But some blocks, such as chests, have extra information to store things such as the items it contains. Tile entities are pretty important in Minecraft, so I think it's time we implement them. To get started, I created a new class to handle this new type, and I added to each chunk a resizable array to store the tile entities. There's no reason for every block to have a tile entity attached to it, since that would just waste data. Then from there, I had to create a system to automatically create tile entities when certain blocks are placed down. And let me tell you, that calling this process difficult would be an understatement. It was a full-on data nightmare. If you ever work on big projects like this, make sure you stay as organized as you can, because things will become hectic quite quickly if you don't. Anyways, after working out the bugs, we now have working tile entities. To demonstrate this, let's craft a chest. If I place the chest down, a tile entity has now been created, and I can click on the chest to open it up. If I put some items into it, I can now leave the game, and when I come back the items are safe and sound inside of the chest. Pretty neat, right? While I was at it, I decided to add the furnace as well. Although it can't smelt anything yet, but we will fix that soon. Anyways, I think it's time to shift our focus away from tile entities, and onto a different kind of entity that's just as important in Minecraft. And the kind of entities I'm talking about are mobs. What is really nice about implementing mobs in this project is that most of the code is already written. And what I mean by that is that if we take a look at the class that handles the player, it simply inherits most of its behavior from another class, simply called entity. This base entity class handles collision, as well as all kinds of other things automatically. So to implement mobs, all I have to do is to make a new class that inherits from this entity class, and add some extra functionality on top of it. The first mob I decided to implement with this new class is the zombie, since its model is the same shape and size as the player, so I can use some of the model information from the player. Then from there, I just had to transfer some textures to get the model up and running. And we now have a zombie. It can't move around right now though, so let's fix that. For now, I will just give it a basic wandering function, and if it hits the side of a block, it will automatically jump. Alright, the zombies can now move around, but their animations are a little bit derpy, but it's a good start. Now I would like to continue working on the zombies, but there is one more thing I want to get done before the end of this episode, and it has become a tradition now, adding a new biome. Last time the biome we added was the taiga biome, but this time I want to add a biome that's a bit more on the warmer side, and that biome is the jungle. To get started, I transferred over some textures that are required for this biome, such as blocks for the jungle trees, as well as watermelon blocks and bamboo. Then, I created a file to handle this biome, and after a few hours of adjustments, we now have a beautiful looking jungle. What's cool is that the bamboo stalks are actually functional, so if I break one, it falls apart, and I actually get bamboo in my inventory. And I can even place it down so it can regrow. And if you wait long enough, you can actually see the bamboo grow. So I would call this biome a major success. We got a lot done in this episode, from implementing crafting and upgrading the background, to implementing tile entities and mobs. Overall, this has been a fantastic episode. Hopefully in the next episode or two, this game will be nearing completion. If you guys have any suggestions though for things you would like to see added, let me know in the comments below. Anyways, thank you guys as always for watching, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye-bye!